All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today for our Controller's Corner session. My name is Lonnie, and I am a business solutions consultant here at Corporate Renaissance Group. I work mostly on the GP side, doing some training and helping our valued customers find efficiencies within Dynamics GP and using the system more effectively. We've designed this series of free webinars to help Dynamics users take their GP to the next level. There is an abundance of functionality available in Dynamics GP, even some small items that many people don't even really know exist. So today's session is dedicated to showing you some easy tips and tricks in Dynamics GP that will help you increase efficiency in using your existing ERP system. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Today's presentation will be recorded and it will be available on demand later this week on the Controller's Corner webpage on the CR Group website. Also, I do encourage you to ask questions, so please go ahead and submit them in the GoToWebinar panel, and I will do my best to get to them at the end of the presentation. And finally, this session does count for a half hour of continuing professional development hours. So we will email an individual certificate to those who attended the session later on this week. So in the session today, we're going to talk about the itemized tips and tricks that we're going to review. Then we'll actually demonstrate these particular tips and tricks in GP. And then obviously I'll review and answer any questions that have been submitted through the GoToWebinar panel. So in terms of slides, it's going to be quick slides, and then we're going to jump right in. So the tips and tricks we're going to look at today are really grouped by module. First, we're going to look at a few system and setup options that include, setting up some home page shortcuts using keyboard keys, adding report options to the My Reports area on the home page, how to turn on or off your posting reports and how they post through the system, and then how to create some custom links to sort of outside websites that you may need to access easily through the system. Then we're going to look at a couple of general ledger features, including the reconcile to GL function available in GP, and the magical checkbox that can reduce reconciliation issues for your subledgers. We'll then shift to functions available in the purchasing and sales side of the product, a feature that is available on both sides in being able to copy either a sales order processing invoice or a purchase order processing transaction. And then finally, we're going to review a functionality available that many don't use, but can be very helpful for understanding from a simplistic high level what cash can be forecasted as incoming and outgoing. So that will hopefully round out our half hour today, and we'll hopefully get through everything that I want to show you today in our tips and tricks. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and dive right into GP, and we're going to look at each of these tips and tricks individually. All right, so this is our home page in Dynamics GP. In this case, you'll see I have some quick links up here. I have some My Reports on my page. And I may want to add some shortcuts available in here. So you'll see I have some shortcuts in here. I don't have anything under here at the moment, so other than customer source, so I don't have any shortcuts designed within the system now. But I potentially would like to put some in here so that I can work very easily and efficiently from my home page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to purchasing, and I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can add shortcuts to the system. So if I am a payables clerk or a bookkeeper and I need to do payables transaction entries in the system, I'm going to open up this window for me. And in here, this is where I can actually go in and I can add a shortcut directly from this screen. So if I click Add to Shortcuts, what's going to happen now is that screen is actually going to appear now on my home page as a shortcut option, so that I have the ability to actually open that window or that transaction screen directly from my home page. So here's my payable transaction entry. I can click on that and open up my transaction entry screen. The other thing you can do with your shortcuts here is you can actually create like hotkeys using your keyboard functions. So one of the ways we can do that is you can create even a smart list, for instance, that you want to run or generate using a hotkey. So to do that, I would go into Smart List, and let's say I have a particular report in my Smart List that I may want to run more often. For instance, an open AP listing, so that I can understand what is required to be paid. So I could pull up something like my transactions by vendor. Okay, and I could potentially add this as a shortcut. So same process, my file, add to shortcuts, and it's now going to appear on my home page when I refresh my home page. I can also then create, as I mentioned, a hotkey so that I can generate that report or that screen using an F4, one of the F key functions within the system. So I'm going to go back to my home page and let it refresh so that it'll show me my smart list. And in here now, I can right-click, and I can go to Shortcut Properties. So in here, it's actually pulling up what I want, and here I can actually assign a shortcut key to that. So rather than having to click on it, I can simply click the F4 on my keyboard, which you can't see that I did, but I did do, and that particular window will open. And the same will be true of any smart list that I create. I can create a hotkey there using my F functions and be able to pull those up. So this is a really great option for creating some quick shortcuts for yourself within the system. So that you can work more from your home page as opposed to having to navigate necessarily through the individual modules within the system. And again, you can use that for reporting on the smart list level as well. The other thing you'll see is down here there is a My Reports function in here, and I don't have any reports in here. And a lot of the times I find people don't use this function predominantly because when you go in to create a report, you have report options that you have to complete. So I'm going to do this based on a trial balance, a financial trial balance that I have. And a lot of people, when they enter these report options, they actually enter the specific date they want. So if you're now, if your date is in here as your February end of month, because you're closing February's month end and you want to run your February trial balances, when you get to April, you're probably not looking at February anymore. You want to look at March. So you have to come in here and change these options and navigate through and then run your reports. But there are some other ways that you can create these reports without entering a specific date, but rather set some parameters around the dates that your system generates for you. So for instance, I may want to look at a monthly trial balance based on a previous month or previous period. So in this case, I have beginning of previous period, and then I have end of previous period. So the system looks at your computer's system date and it says, okay, well, what month are we in right now? I want to run the trial balance for the month before. So in this case, because we're in March, the system's going to know that for this particular report, I want to run it for February, which 9 times out of 10 is going to be the case. You're usually closing your prior months currently. So this is where you'll be able to sort of utilize this function. And by doing this, I can insert this in here. I want to run for all reports. And now I've created this report option. So I can click on the My Reports and I can give it a name. So I can call this Monthly Trial Balance. And maybe I know it's for month end because it's for the preceding month. I can put month end in here and I can click OK. So now I can close this, and I'm going to save my options. So when I go back to my home page now, I should see in the My Reports box that trial balance that I just created. So now when I click on it, it's going to automatically generate that report for me within the system. So I don't have to necessarily go back to the report options and modify my date settings and all that stuff in order to generate the data that's in the system. And it's always going to change that month for me. So next month in April, it's going to run me March's, and I'm going to be able to look at March's results without having to go into the report options and changing those options. So again, a little bit faster, quick, easy access from your home page to run reports that you may need on a regular basis, particularly, monthly or quarterly closings and things like that. So really quick ways to run some reports there. All right, so that kind of takes care of some quick links and some reports options in terms of your homepage. The other question I get a lot from customers is when GP gets configured initially, there are a ton of reports that print when you post documents within the system, whether it's on the AP side, the sales side, the GL side. Every time you post a transaction, you can get a series of reports. Could be 4 or 5 different reports that potentially want to print. And you may or may not need those particular reports for anything. You may want some, not others. You may want none of them because you can easily print or look at information within the system easily. So I'm going to show you how you can actually turn those off and some of the other functions that exist in there. Now, this is a setup function within GP. So with that said, it means that you have to have access to the setup functions either as a power user or as an administrator in the system, or some of the administrative functions within the system in order to access this window. So bear that in mind when you're looking at this. Only certain people may have access to these functions as users within the system. So I'm going to go into the setup for posting and posting. And I'm going to click on that. It's going to open up my posting setup window. So this window is ultimately where your setup components as it relates to posting reside. And they are basically created here by module, very similar to how the system is laid out. And if I go ahead and click on my financial module, I also have then an origin option. So these are the different types of financial transaction entries that exist. So we have bank deposits, bank transactions, bank transfers, and then of course we have general journals, reconcile bank statement, all of those types of things exist in here. And in each series, it's going to list you out the different types of transactions that may exist that could ultimately be producing some sort of posting component in terms of a value that would require some reports of some sort. So there we go. On the purchasing side, you'll see we have all those entries in here, payment entries, transaction entries, purchase order entries, the receivings, etc. Okay. So if I were to select my payables transaction entry as an option in here, what you'll notice is that there's a couple things that happen at the top here. First, you have this post to and post through general ledger files. What this means is that GP has an option of a 1-step or 2-step posting process. If this is not selected, it means it's a 2-step posting process. So when you post a batch or an invoice in payables transaction entry, it is going to subsequently create a batch in financial to be posted to the GL. So when you post at the payable side, it's posting your subledger data, but then you have to go into financial and post the general ledger data, hence 2 steps. If this is checked, you are telling the system, I want you to do all of those steps in one. So it means that when I post my payables transaction entry batch in AP, it's creating changes to the subledger level, but it's also posting all the way through to the general ledger at the same time. So if you currently have a setup of a 2-step posting process and you want to eliminate that, you just simply have to come into this section and check this box that says post through. We do have clients that work in multi-currency, so sometimes being able to see both currencies as they operate in terms of the originating transaction and its functional equivalent are important. So you'll actually see in here there's a box called Include Multi-Currency Info. What that means is that when I post, any of the reports that I am printing will be included in multi-currency options. So you would see the originating transaction amount as it relates to the currency you entered it in, and then what its functional equivalent is, so what it's been converted to in terms of the system. So if you're reporting or functional currency is Canadian, then what's the Canadian equivalent based on the rate used when it was entered. Down here at the bottom is where all these reports reside. So for payables transaction entry, you could have up to 6 reports, which seems probably a little overkill. So you can opt to turn some of these reports on or off using the checkbox that's found on the left-hand side. So this allows me to say, I want this report. I want to see my posting journal for my transaction entries. And that includes, all the vendor information, the distributions for the transaction, and again, if I'm using multi-currency, the values, etc. So this is very important. If you want to see that, these are what we check. Now, most of these I've turned off in my environment, but again, I can come in here and turn them back on if there's anything I want to keep in here. Okay. What's found over here, these checkboxes to the right of the report name, is how do you want it to print for you? So these all mean something different. The question mark means I want it to ask me each time the report is generated where I want it to print. And I can define whether it's printed to screen, to printer, or to file. By using this, it's going to ask me each time. If I say to myself, well, I don't want it to ask me. I only want it to print to screen, and I just want to look at it on screen and choose whether or not I print it to the printer when I do that. I can take this question mark off, and I can choose screen. So what this means now is when I post the transaction, it will automatically generate the report and show it on my screen for me so that I can validate. And if I want to print it, I can still print it to hard copy from that point. If I keep these reports in hard copy regardless of anything else, I always need a hard copy to track, then the printer option here is an option. So I can select that, and again, when I post my batch, it's going to automatically pop up to print that particular report to my printer in hard copy. And then finally, I have the option to print to file. When you choose print to file, you do have to choose what type you want it in. So do I want it in a text file, tab delimited, comma delimited, which are all very similar in format, okay? So keep that in mind. If you're printing to file, you need to select the type that comes with it. So that's how you can sort of turn your reports on or off and determine how you want them to print within the system, as well as some functions up here that allow you to determine your two-step or one-step posting process and whether or not you need the multi-currency info in there. So that's all in the posting setup by module, by transaction type that's available in GP. All right. So now we have come across a lot of clients that have indicated that they navigate to other websites or applications while working in GP. For example, you might have a customer that requires you to upload invoices to their portal, some sort of portal for processing. And the good news is there's actually an easy way to access that directly from Dynamics GP as opposed to having to close, launch a separate web browser, type in the portal, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to show you a couple things. There's a couple setup options that are required initially to get that started. So first we're going to go into the Microsoft Dynamics GP menu, and we're going to go to Tools and Setup. And under Company, oops, sorry, wrong one. Got a little click happy there, company. Okay. So in here, where you will see is there's an Internet User Defined field, which means you can actually create fields in here where you can track specific information related to anything, a vendor, customers, inventory items, etc. And so right now, I added this label 3 as Invoice Portal. So this is what I want to call it on the customer page when I'm looking at it. And you see there's also a login and password here, so if I want to be able to track our login and password information for that invoice portal for that customer in here so that I don't have to keep track of that information in other areas, I can also track it in here so that when I go to launch that portal, I have the login and password easily viewable to me at that time. So this is the first thing you want to set up is the label itself. So now that I've done that, I have to actually create my custom link. So the way that works is it's also on the Tools Setup under Company, but it's under Custom Link. So I'm going to click Custom Link here. And when I want to create a new custom link, I click the New button, and I have to determine what the prompt is. So in this case, I'm using this as a customer portal, and so I'm going to give it a label of Customer Invoice Portal. And I want to attach it to their primary address, and I want to attach it to the invoice portal address field that I just created at the Internet User Defined field settings. Okay, so once I save that, you're going to see it appears here on my list, and I can now click OK on that and close that window. So now if I go to a customer card, and I'm just going to pick up any customer in here, I can now click on this little World Wide Web icon for the internet addresses. And down here I will see my invoice portal. So in here, I can create a link in that portal. And if, again, I wanted to put in my login and password here, as I had talked about, I can do that through here as well. So that I can then launch these websites directly right from the system from the customer page. So quick and easy. So now we're going to shift our focus a little bit. We're going to move into sort of the financial module a little bit and talk about reconciliations. So the first thing is, we know at month end, we want to try and make the reconciliation process a little easier. And as we know, in a perfect world, when we check our subledger totals against our GL, everything would be reconciled every month without any issues or investigation work. However, as most of us have probably discovered in our times working in accounting and finance, that is not always the case. At that point, you're probably spending a lot of very valuable time hunting through transactions to find the cause of the reconciliation issue. So where I find a great starting point to find transactions that may be causing your out of balance is the reconcile to GL function. And where that's found is in the financial module under routines. You will see this reconcile to GL. And if I open that up, it's going to open up this window for me where I have to populate a little bit of information as it relates to what I want to reconcile or which subledger I'm trying to tie off. So reconciliation date is just the date that you're looking at this reconciliation. You can put whatever date you like in there. What's really important, though, is the date range. So what is the period I'm trying to reconcile? So if I know that February reconciled, but now March is out of balance, then I know that the issue likely resides in March. So I would do my range from March 1st to March 31st. And then I would select which module I want to reconcile. So this function exists for payables management, receivables management, and bank reconciliation and inventory. So I'm going to choose the payables management, and you want to make sure you put in the account in terms of the GL account that is tied to that reconciliation or that subledger. And when I click process, it's going to produce an output file for me to my desktop, but it will launch it and open it for me in Excel, which is basically going to break down for me all of the transactions that exist in sort of a couple of ways. So the first being my subledger. So here are all the transactions that transpired in my subledger in March, and here are all the transactions that transpired in my general ledger in March. Okay, so good news is I don't have any unmatched transactions. And what that means is the system's looking to the subledger and to the general ledger and seeing, are there transactions that exist on one side but not the other? Meaning, did I post in payables but I didn't post my batch in financial? Or did somebody do something very bad and post an entry to my control account for AP through the general ledger as opposed to going through the subledger? Good news is I don't have any of those. So my reconciliation issue could potentially be in here. Potentially matched transactions means that the system has found transactions that tie together in some aspect, but they're not identical. So we may want to investigate those to see if they're potentially the cause of my out of balance. And then, of course, I have my match transactions down here where the system says I have an identical match between the subledger and the general ledger for those transactions. So this is where I would usually start if I have a reconciliation issue that I'm trying to identify. This function, I believe, goes back to GP 2010 for payables and receivables management. And then bank reconciliation and inventory were added in GP 2013 R2. So if you're on any sort of supported version of GP at this time, these functions should be available to you to use if you haven't been using them prior to now. Most of the time, reconciliation issues occur because someone has either entered the incorrect account at the subledger level for the control account, or they've done a general journal entry to a control account, which we slap hands for that. We're not allowed to do that. So there is a function in GP that allows you to ensure that people can't do that. They cannot post general ledger transactions to a control account. And where that's found is on the card section under account. I can actually pick up a control account. Here's my cash account. And this little box right here is the magical box of allow account entry. By deselecting this box, it means that I'm not allowed to type in this account as use in a transaction. So if I go into a general ledger account or a general ledger journal entry and I try to enter this account to be entered, it's going to actually error out. It's going to tell me I'm not permitted to enter that account manually. So what that then says to the system is I have to go through the subledger in order for that to work. Now, the important thing to note about that is in order for it to work, you have to actually set up accounts at the subledger level. So if I was using my AP or AR control accounts at the customer or vendor level, I have to make sure that that account is defaulted. Or at least at the posting level. So if I go into the vendor here, I have to make sure that at the account setup, at the very minimum, I'm setting up what my default AR account is. So that when I go in to create an invoice, the system pulls that into the transaction automatically and I'm not required to type it. If I have to type it, the system's going to error out and say, it's a control account, you can't type in entries. So this is a very important one, but this will really help you moving forward to avoid reconciliation issues if you are finding they are presenting themselves at month end. All right, so I'm going to jump over to purchasing here and show you another helpful feature within GP if you are using purchase order processing or sales order processing. You can actually use copy functions. So rather than creating each line of an invoice or purchase order that could potentially be repeated, you can simply copy and modify them as needed. So if I were to create a PO in here, by simply entering a new PO number. And I'm going to select my vendor ID that I want to create this PO for. Okay. And at the top, I have my action buttons up here. So if I click on this, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of options available. But here I have copy PO lines to current PO and create and copy a new PO. Okay, so there's lots of different functions available in here. So I want to create and copy. So I'm going to select the source PO I want to copy from. So I can pick up an old PO from this particular vendor or any vendor. But in this case, I have some POs that are outstanding in here that I've used for this particular vendor before. So if I do a lot of repeat purchases for the same items, this does make the data entry side a lot faster. So here I can then determine what I want to copy. I can copy all lines. I can include canceled lines. So lots of different options that are available to determine what gets copied across from the old PO to the new PO. And I can indicate my document dates, required dates and stuff like that can be changed in here. So obviously the new PO would have different date conventions than what the old one had. If I want, I can preview this so I can see what it's going to look like in terms of content for lines. So there's the line item that I'm ultimately copying. And once I'm ready, I would simply click the copy button, and it's now going to copy the details from the PO into this PO. So that then allows me to quickly and easily create POs with the same functions over and over again or same items over and over again without having to go in and manually create the PO each time. Much faster, much more efficient for repeat purchases. And so finally, the item I'm going to show you today is the cash flow management tool in Dynamics GP. This too is a very simple tool, predominantly used for a high-level overview of some components for outgoing and incoming cash. And it can be found in the Microsoft Dynamics GP menu under Setup and Financial. So you will see there's a cash flow forecast function down here. So the setup of the cash flow forecast within GP allows you to sort of determine what do I want to pull in as part of the forecast. So my bank accounts, I want to know what cash is sitting in those bank accounts. Do I want to include them all, or do I want to include some? And I can choose which ones I'm including as part of this process. So in this case, I'm including all, I think, except petty cash. Then on the sales side, I want to see for incoming cash, what am I expecting to come in from receivables? And I can choose either those that are open or those that are in work or both. And I can determine how the forecast should be pulling that customer's data. So do I want it to pull from the due date that's actually on the invoice, or do I want the system to actually pull from the average days calculated that that customer pays us for? So in this case, I chose average days because, let's be honest, very few customers typically pay exactly on the due date, so we want to actually take something that may be a little bit more accurate. And then on the purchasing side, I can determine, based on due date on when I'm supposed to pay it for open and work, what outgoing cash has to take part based on what's sitting in payables for my vendors. And finally, I have this cash flow transaction. So as we all know, not all outgoing cash runs through payables management. You could have payroll entries that are done separately outside of the payables management side. So I can actually put in cash flow transactions in here for incoming or outgoing that are not tied to receivables or payables, and include those in my calculations for what my cash position may look like. And then I can determine how many weeks do I want to display. So once I've created that forecast, I can now go in and look at what they call a cash flow calendar. So in here, I can go into my cash flow transactions and I can look at those. And on the inquiry side in financial, there is a cash flow calendar that sort of breaks down for me where my, go back here, where my incoming and outgoing cash is actually taking place. So the cash flow calendar will break this down for me and show me my incoming and outgoing values to give me a cash position on a day-to-day basis over that 6-week period that I've identified in here. So again, very high level. It's not really for a lot of detail, but it does give you the opportunity to sort of take a look at what your cash position may look like from day to day, and just give you sort of a very high-level quick look. It's not as detailed as a cash flow statement and things like that may operate, but does give you at least some exposure and understanding of what you're looking at daily. And if I click on any of these fields, I can actually look at the Cash Flow Explorer that tells me what's making up those balances in here. So in receivables, if I look at open, here are the invoices that I'm expecting will be received for payment on that date based on the average days paid. All right, so that sort of wraps up the demonstration side for today. With that said, I'm going to take a look at the webinar panel here to see if there are any questions from anybody. Okay, so there was some questions about how they can go back and watch this video again. So this will be available on our website later this week in a recorded version. So you'll be able to go back and take a look at this at any time and watch it over and over and over again as you so choose. All right, so another question I have, let me just take a look here. So they're asking about a set reconciliation number. So there isn't a set reconciliation number. It gets assigned as you open the reconciliation window. But if you've already set up the accounts for the module that you're using, most of the details will already sort of pre-fill when you go in, and it's just giving you a new number for each time you process a reconciliation. You can certainly bring up a past reconciliation number that's already been done and reopen that file. The file also gets saved wherever you identified the path on there. So if it's on a desktop or in a network file, you can simply go back to that file at any time and take a look at it. So that's all the questions I have in the GoToWebinar panel today. So if you do think of any other questions, certainly reach out to us at any time, and we are more than happy to help you with your GP and finding efficiencies within the system that you may not already know about or be using at this point in time. With that said, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today. Please check out our other Controllers Corner webinars and make sure to get registered for those. And again, you will get a certificate for your professional hours later on this week. And finally, there will be a survey that should appear after the webinar. So we really appreciate your feedback, so please take a moment and provide that so that we can keep improving these sessions moving forward. So thank you again, and please feel free to reach out to anyone on our team with any questions or any ways we can help you with your GP moving forward. And have a wonderful day.